Look at you trying to bless someone when your own life is already a mess.
As Adora and her best friend Nkechi walked down to the stream that afternoon, something felt wrong immediately. The whole place was unusually quiet. No birds were singing in the trees, and no women were laughing nearby. No sounds of clay pots knocking together or children playing. Even the air felt heavy and uncomfortable. Nkechi slowed down nervously and looked around. "This place feels strange today," she whispered softly, but Adora just rolled her eyes carelessly. "You are afraid of everything," she laughed at her. Then, suddenly, they saw her, an old crippled woman struggling right beside the stream. Her back was bent terribly, she dragged one leg weakly behind her, and an empty clay pot sat next to her. The poor woman stretched her shaking hands toward the water, trying her best to fetch some, but her weak body could barely move. Right away, Nkechi felt so much pity and rushed forward. "Grandmother, let me help you." But out of nowhere, Adora grabbed Nkechi's arm roughly. "Wait." Nkechi looked back, confused. "What are you doing?" A wicked smile slowly spread across Adora's face. "Watch me." Nkechi's heart dropped instantly. "Adora, please don't do anything stupid." The old woman looked up with hope the moment she saw Adora coming closer. "My daughter, please help me fetch some water." The moment she called her "my daughter," Adora's face twisted in anger. Without saying a single word, she snatched the clay pot from the old woman, filled it up with water slowly, and then suddenly dumped the whole thing right over the old woman's head. The old woman gasped loudly in shock as the cold water soaked her completely. "Adora!" Nkechi screamed in horror. But Adora just pointed angrily at the helpless woman. "Don't you ever call me your daughter again." The old woman opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a word, Adora scooped up another pot of water and poured it over her again. This time, the old woman almost fell over. Nkechi quickly rushed in and held her gently. "What is wrong with you?" Nkechi cried out in anger. She immediately dropped to her knees. "Please forgive her, grandmother." Nkechi used her own wrapper to carefully dry the old woman off while the woman just stared at her in silence. Then, the old woman spoke softly. "You are kind. Good things will follow you in life." Suddenly, Adora burst into loud, mocking laughter. "Look at you trying to bless someone when your own life is already a mess." Right then, the whole mood changed. A strong wind started blowing wildly around them. The old woman turned slowly toward Adora, and her eyes suddenly became terrifying. Her voice didn't sound like a normal human's anymore. "Very soon," she said slowly, "you will become even more miserable and uglier than I am." Nkechi froze in fear right there, but Adora just laughed it off like it was nothing. "Crazy old woman." She turned around proudly and strutted away, leaving the old woman standing there silently, watching her walk into the distance. Hey besties! Before we go any further into this emotional story packed with big lessons, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Now, come with me as we dive deeper into this heartbreaking tale of pride, pain, and lessons learned. Back in the days when moonlight stories filled the cool night air and elders gathered children under the trees to teach them wisdom, there lived a young girl named Adora. From the day she was born, she became the center of her parents' whole world. Her mother, Ebel, had suffered through many painful years without a child. Women used to whisper behind her back whenever they gathered. Some secretly called her barren. Others made fun of her husband, Obinna, saying his family line would end with him. Many nights, Ebel cried herself to sleep while Obinna sat beside her, feeling completely helpless. "My wife," he would whisper gently, "one day God will remember us." Ebel visited local herbalists. She drank bitter concoctions. She prayed without stopping. She even fasted until she grew weak. Then, one miraculous day, after years of tears and heartache, Ebel finally got pregnant. The news spread everywhere like wildfire. Their family celebrated with so much joy. Even the people who used to mock them suddenly acted like friendly neighbors. And when Adora was finally born, her parents felt like heaven itself had visited their home. The baby was insanely beautiful. Her skin glowed like the morning sun. Her eyes were sharp and bright. And whenever she smiled, people forgot their worries completely. Even as a little child, strangers would stop in their tracks just to admire her. Chai. This child is way too beautiful, women would say. Obina carried his daughter proudly everywhere he went, like she was a shiny crown on his head. Ebel treated her like delicate gold, but after Adaora was born, no other child ever came. Years passed by quietly. Ebel tried herbs again. She visited different healers. She prayed endlessly. But nothing worked. Eventually, both parents accepted that Adaora was going to be their only child. And that's when they made a dangerous mistake. They showered her with all their love without a single bit of discipline. They never corrected her. They never punished her. They never said no to her. If Adaora cried for something, she got it right away. If another child had a disagreement with her, Obina would march angrily to the child's house to fight their parents. If she talked down to an elder, Ebel defended her shamelessly. "Leave my daughter alone," Ebel would say proudly. "She is still young, she doesn't know what she's doing." But Adaora knew exactly what she was doing. And slowly, pride took over her heart. As she grew older, her beauty became even more impossible to ignore. Young girls admired her. Young men secretly stared at her. Old women praised her looks non-stop, but underneath all that beauty was a nasty attitude. Adaora became rude, arrogant, respectful to no one, and extremely full of herself. Unlike other girls her age, she never swept the yard. She never washed dishes. She never fetched water. She never cooked. Whenever Ebel asked her to help around the house, Adaora would complain right away. "Mom, do you want to stress me out?" And before long, Ebel would gently brush her off. "Don't worry, my daughter. Leave it, I'll do it myself." Meanwhile, Adaora spent most of her time staring at herself and admiring her own looks. She openly made fun of hard-working girls. She laughed at poor people without a second thought. And worst of all, she insulted elders without any fear. One afternoon, an elderly woman greeted her kindly. "Good afternoon, my daughter." Adaora just looked her up and down rudely and snapped back, "Do I look like your mate?" The woman froze in total shock. Another day, an old man tried to correct her in public after she insulted a younger girl. Instead of apologizing, Adaora yelled back at him, "You're already old. Go and sleep instead of annoying young people." The whole village was stunned. People constantly complained to her parents, but Obina always defended her stubbornly. "She's still a child. She will change. Don't go around cursing my daughter." Meanwhile, Ebel secretly loved hearing people talk about Adora's beauty. Pride had blinded both parents completely. And because nobody ever put Adaora in her place, her bad behavior just kept growing day after day. In those days, when people still believed that a good friend could either save your life or ruin it, there was only one person who stayed close to Adaora despite her terrible attitude, her best friend, Nkechi. And Nkechi was everything Adaora was not. She was kind, gentle, respectful, hardworking. While other people stayed away from Adaora because of her bad attitude, Nkechi stayed right beside her like a true sister. Whenever Adaora insulted people in public, Nkechi was always the one running after them to apologize. Whenever Adaora made fun of elders, Nkechi tried her best to correct her. But Adaora hated being corrected. One evening, after Adaora insulted an elderly widow at the market square, Nkechi finally confronted her on their way home. "Adaora," Nkechi said quietly, "one day, this kind of behavior will bring real trouble." Immediately, Adaora stopped walking and turned on her angrily. "Don't you ever try to correct me again," she snapped. "I know what I'm doing. You're acting like you're my mother." Nkechi sighed heavily in frustration. "You can't keep talking to elders like this," she said softly. "It's wrong." But Adaora just laughed mockingly. "What can they possibly do to me?" she asked proudly. "Nothing. My parents love me." That sentence truly scared Nkechi. Right at that moment, she realized Adaora actually believed she was completely untouchable. A few days later, on a hot afternoon, Ebel realized there was no water left in the house. She wiped the sweat off her face tiredly and called out loudly, Adora. From inside the room, Adora answered lazily, "What is it again?" Ebel forced a gentle smile. "My daughter, please go to the stream and fetch some water." Adora frowned in irritation immediately. "No." Ebel looked shocked. "My daughter, please. I'm so tired." But Adora crossed her arms stubbornly. "I said no." Ebel tried talking to her gently again. "You're not a little child anymore." But Adora just hissed loudly and turned her face away. Right at that moment, Nkechi walked into the compound carrying a small basket. The moment she noticed the heavy mood, she immediately guessed what was going on. "I'll go with her," Nkechi offered right away. Adora rolled her eyes dramatically. "Look at stress," she muttered under her breath. Ebel quickly held Adora's hand, practically begging. "Please go. Just this once." After a lot of begging and endless complaining, Adora finally agreed reluctantly. The two girls picked up their clay pots and started walking toward the stream. But the entire way there, Adora didn't stop whining. "Why should I be fetching water like some poor person?" she grumbled angrily, and Nkechi laughed softly. "Fetching water won't make you lose your beauty." Adora hissed loudly and proudly adjusted the pot on her waist. "You just wouldn't understand." The two friends kept walking toward the stream on that hot afternoon. But as they got closer, something felt strange immediately. The whole place was dead silent. No birds chirping in the trees. No women laughing while washing clothes. No sounds of gossip or pots clinking together. Even the wind felt heavy and creepy, and Nkechi slowed down nervously and looked around carefully. "This place feels weird today," she whispered softly, but Adora ignored her completely. "You're scared of everything," she scoffed carelessly. Then suddenly, they saw her, an old crippled woman struggling right by the stream. Her back was bent terribly. One of her legs dragged weakly behind her. Her wrapper looked old and faded from years of hardship. Beside her sat an empty clay pot. The poor woman reached her shaking hands toward the water, desperate to fetch some, but her weak body could barely move. Nkechi's heart melted with pity right away. "Chai, poor grandmother," she murmured sadly, rushing forward. "Grandmother, let me help you." But suddenly, Adora grabbed Nkechi's arm roughly. "Wait." Nkechi turned around, confused. "What are you doing?" A cruel smile slowly spread across Adora's face. "Watch me." Panic instantly hit Nkechi. "Adora, don't do anything stupid." But Adora ignored her completely and walked over to the old woman. The crippled woman looked up with hope the moment she saw her coming. Relief filled her tired eyes. "My daughter," the old woman said weakly, "please help me fetch some water." The moment she called her, "my daughter," Adora's face turned dark with rage. Without saying a word, she snatched the clay pot aggressively out of the old woman's hands. The old woman smiled weakly, thinking help had finally arrived. Nkechi stood behind them nervously, praying silently that her friend would act right. Adora walked down to the stream slowly, fetched water carefully, and filled the pot to the brim. The old woman smiled gratefully, then suddenly, whoosh, Adora dumped the entire pot of water right over the old woman's body. The old woman gasped out loud in total shock as the freezing water soaked her completely. "Adora!" Nkechi screamed in horror. The old woman trembled uncontrollably as water dripped from her weak body, but Adora just pointed at her angrily. "Don't you ever call me your daughter again." The old woman quickly opened her mouth to speak, but before she could get a word out, Adora scooped up another pot of water and splashed it on her again. This time, the force almost knocked the old woman to the ground. Nkechi rushed forward in horror. "What is wrong with you?" she cried angrily, quickly holding the old woman so she wouldn't fall over. Then Nkechi dropped to her knees immediately. "Please forgive her, grandmother." Tears filled Nkechi's eyes as she gently used her wrapper to dry the soaked woman. The old woman stared silently at Nkechi for a long moment, then she spoke softly, "You are kind. Goodness will follow you in life." Suddenly, Adora burst into loud, mocking laughter. "Look at you," she said cruelly. "You're giving someone a blessing when your own life is a total mess." Instantly, the entire atmosphere shifted. The wind started blowing wildly around them. The trees shook violently. The old woman turned slowly toward Adora, and her eyes suddenly became terrifying, cold, deep, and unnatural. Even her voice changed completely. "Very soon," she said slowly, "you will become even more miserable and uglier than I am." A weird gust of wind swept across the stream right then. Nkechi froze in complete terror. But Adora just laughed it off and rolled her eyes. Crazy old woman. She turned around proudly and strutted off without looking back. Before leaving, Nkechi bowed respectfully one last time. "Please forgive her," she whispered fearfully. The old woman didn't say another word. She just stood there silently, watching Adora disappear into the distance. Days passed peacefully after the incident at the stream.
Good morning, my friends.
Slowly, normal life returned. Adora forgot about the old crippled woman completely and went right back to her proud ways, acting like nothing had happened, but Nkechi was still deeply shaken. Sometimes, she remembered the terrifying way the old woman's voice had changed. Other times, she remembered her cold eyes and that weird wind blowing around the stream. And every time those words echoed in her mind, fear gripped her heart again. "Soon, you will become more miserable and uglier than I am." Then one evening, dark clouds suddenly covered the sky. The air turned cold and eerie. Inside the house, Ebel was tidying things up when she noticed something she needed from outside. "Adora," she called out gently. From inside her room, Adora answered lazily, "What is it?" "Please bring that basket outside for me." Adora hissed softly in annoyance, but she finally got up. As she walked carelessly toward the front door, her foot suddenly slipped on some water that had spilled on the floor earlier. Everything happened in a flash. "Oh!" Her body flew violently backward, then. Crack! Her head slammed into the hard ground with a sickening thud. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the compound instantly. Ebel dropped everything on the spot. "Adora!" Obinna rushed outside in pure panic. Both parents froze in complete horror the second they saw their daughter lying there lifeless on the floor. Blood was slowly trickling out from the side of her head. Ebel screamed frantically and collapsed right beside her daughter. "My child! My child!" Obinna hurriedly lifted Adora in a panic while neighbors came running into the compound from every direction. A crowd gathered immediately. Panic spread everywhere. The very same proud, beautiful girl who used to walk around like a queen was now lying helpless like a broken doll. That very night, an herbalist was called in urgently. He examined Adora carefully while the whole family waited in tense anxiety, but as the old man gently touched her back, his face suddenly turned dark. Ebel's heart sank immediately. "What is it?" she asked, terrified. The herbalist sighed heavily. "She broke her backbone." Ebel collapsed to the ground, crying at the top of her lungs. Obinna grabbed the old man desperately. "Please save my daughter," he begged with tears streaming down his face. The herbalist explained that the treatment would be extremely painful. Her beautiful hair would have to be shaved off completely. Special herbal mixtures would need to be rubbed onto her head and spine. Then, his voice grew even heavier. "And she may never walk again." Deep sorrow filled the entire house instantly. Ebel cried day and night until her eyes became swollen. Obinna moved around looking like a man carrying the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. The exact girl who used to mock crippled people was now completely unable to stand on her own 2 feet. The girl who obsessed over her looks lost all her gorgeous hair. Her once glowing face turned pale and weak. Her body grew thinner with each passing day, and every single night, painful screams echoed from her room. "Oh! My back! Please help me!" Outside, people whispered quietly. Some remembered all the cruel things Adora had done. Others just felt deep pity for her. Meanwhile, Nkechi stayed faithfully by her side. Even after all the insults and fights, she refused to give up on her best friend. She visited constantly, patiently fed Adora, gently washed her body, and comforted Ebel whenever the woman broke down in tears. One painful night, Adora looked weakly at her reflection and burst into tears. "I'm ugly now," she sobbed bitterly. "My beauty is totally gone." Nkechi sat beside her quietly and gently held her trembling hand. "No," she whispered softly. "You are still alive." But secretly, as Nkechi looked at her suffering friend, she remembered the old crippled woman's curse all over again. And fear slowly crept into her heart. Obinna spent massive amounts of money desperately searching for anyone who could heal his daughter. Different herbalists showed up at the house one after another. Some brought powerful remedies. Others performed strange traditional rites, but nothing worked. Healers came from faraway places. Still, nothing changed. Instead, Adora only got weaker with each passing day. Her body shrank further. Her voice grew fainter. And every night, painful cries echoed through the compound. One evening, as Ebel sat beside her daughter crying silently, Nkechi finally gathered the courage to speak up. "There is something I never told you," she said softly. Ebel looked up at her immediately. "What is it?" Nkechi hesitated for a second, then slowly opened up about everything that had happened at the stream that afternoon. Every single insult. Every wicked act. Every cruel word Adora had thrown at the old crippled woman. And finally, every word of that terrifying curse. As Nkechi spoke, Ebel's face turned completely pale with fear. Obinna stood frozen in absolute shock. For the very first time, both parents realized that their daughter's terrible behavior had completely ruined her life. Ebel burst into heavy tears right away. "This is all our fault," she cried in anguish. Obinna covered his face in shame. The next morning, they rushed to see the village Dibia. The old man listened silently without interrupting them even once. Then, he slowly closed his eyes deep in thought. The whole room went dead silent. A long moment passed before he finally spoke. The crippled woman was no ordinary human. Ebel's body shivered instantly. "She was a spirit," the Dibia continued heavily. "And your daughter offended her deeply." Ebel began shaking uncontrollably. The old man looked right at them. "You spoiled your daughter until pride ate her up. You protected her instead of correcting her. Now, her own pride has broken her." Obinna broke down completely. Tears ran freely down his face. "What do we do?" he begged desperately. The Dibia let out a deep sigh before answering. "You must go back to the stream. You must apologize with all your heart. Only mercy can save her now." The following morning felt heavy with fear and sorrow. Obinna and Ebel carefully carried the weak Adora down to the stream. Nkechi followed quietly behind them. Nobody said a word the entire way. When they finally arrived at the stream, the old crippled woman was standing right there again, in the exact spot where they first saw her. Immediately, Nkechi dropped flat to the ground in total respect. Ebel and Obinna dropped down right after her. Both parents cried bitterly. "Please forgive our daughter." Ebel sobbed painfully. "We failed as parents. We spoiled her. We are so sorry." Weak and shaking, Adora could barely lift her head. Tears rolled endlessly down her cheeks. "I am sorry," she cried softly. "Please forgive me." The old woman stared silently at all of them for a long time. Then finally, she spoke in a slow voice. "When parents refuse to discipline a child, the world will discipline that child instead." Ebel cried even harder. The old woman continued, "You loved her the wrong way. You protected her from correction, and pride filled her heart." Then she slowly turned toward Adora. "Beauty without humility is nothing but ugliness." The entire stream fell completely silent. Only the faint sound of flowing water could be heard in the background. Finally, the old woman took a deep breath. "I forgive you." Instantly, a strange sense of peace filled the air around them. The wind blew softly and gently. The stream sparkled under the sunlight in a magical way. Then, suddenly, Adora felt strength slowly flowing back into her legs. Her eyes went wide with shock. Slowly, carefully, she stood up, everyone gasped out loud. Ebel screamed with pure joy. Obinna burst into wild tears of happiness. Nkechi covered her mouth in utter shock. Even Adora couldn't believe what was happening, crying heavily. She fell to her knees before the old woman. Thank you. Thank you. But when she slowly looked up again, the old woman was gone. Completely gone. Only the soft sound of running water remained by the quiet stream. From that day on, Adora became a totally changed person. The proud, arrogant girl everyone used to fear slowly faded away. In her place stood a gentle, humble young woman. For the very first time in her life, Adora started helping her mother with household chores. She swept the compound happily. She fetched water without complaining. She cooked with Ebel in the kitchen. And whenever elders greeted her, she bowed respectfully. People in the village could hardly believe the transformation. Some even whispered among themselves in surprise, "Is this really Adora?" The same girl who used to insult everyone now went from house to house, openly apologizing to everyone she had ever mistreated. "Please forgive me," she would say with tears in her eyes. "I was proud and foolish." But the biggest change of all was how she cherished Nkechi. One quiet evening, the two friends sat together outside as a gentle breeze blew softly around them. Adora suddenly held Nkechi's hand with deep emotion. "You never gave up on me," she said tearfully, and Nkechi smiled warmly. "That's what true friendship is all about." Tears welled up in Adora's eyes. For the first time in her life, she realized that the people she used to look down on were the ones who truly loved her. As the years went by, Adora became known for something nobody ever expected. She started teaching younger girls about humility and kindness. She warned parents against overspoiling their children. And she shared her painful story openly wherever she went. Many people listened carefully because they remembered the kind of person she used to be. One afternoon, a young girl insulted an elderly woman in public. Instead of laughing, Adora walked over to her gently. "Don't let pride ruin your future," she said softly. The young girl immediately lowered her head in shame and apologized. Eventually, community started inviting Adora to speak to young people far and wide. Her story spread everywhere. Not because she was once beautiful, but because she learned humility through pain. Years later, on a peaceful afternoon, Adora was standing once again by the very stream where her life had changed forever. Suddenly, she noticed an elderly woman struggling with a clay pot. Without missing a beat, Adora rushed forward with a warm smile. "Grandmother, let me help you." As she gently helped the old woman fetch water, Nkechi stood nearby, watching proudly with a big smile on her face. Then slowly, the moment faded quietly as Adora's voice echoed softly, "Kindness costs nothing. But pride can cost everything."